This is a Film Stories original podcast.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
This episode is brought to you by San Pellegrino Ciao, a new kind of flavorless sparkling water. The kind made with real fruit juice, a pinch of Sicilian salt, and the sparkle of the Italian sun. With no added sugar and just 10 or less calories per can, enjoy. With love, from Italy. By San Pellegrino Ciao now.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I am a writer and film critic, and today I'm being joined by Kaleem Aftab for the first in a mini-series of podcasts about Jonathan Glazer's movies. Hi Kaleem.
Hey John, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. So this podcast is going to be different from the usual season of Writers on Film because we're promoting and celebrating the publication of my book, Darkness Visible. I keep getting the title mixed up. I keep thinking Invisible Darkness, Darkness Visible, the cinema of Jonathan Glazer. And so I'm going to do a podcast for each of his films and discuss it. And we decided we were going to do Sexy Beast together. Because you're a sexy beast, that was the reason.
Well, thank you. I thought it was because I can decide it was because you thought I was Gail or Don.
Yeah, I've got to remember to hit the explicit language on the podcast for this one, because I don't think we can get through this one without effing and jeffing somewhat.
I absolutely don't effing believe that's true.
Let's do it. Hell's teeth. Let's try. Flipping heck. Let's do the airplane version of Sexy Beast. So this film came out in 2000. It's obviously Glazer's debut film. It is, in a sense, it sort of came out with a slew of gangster movies, British gangster movies, inspired by Guy Ritchie's Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, which had come out a few years earlier. And it came out the same year as Gangster Number One, Ritchie's very own Snatch, and a whole. I'm not sure if there was another one as well that was in the mix at the time.
Yeah, wasn't there Lucky Number 11? That was a film that came out with Bruce Willis in. I mean, I know that was a little bit different, but it was a Scottish filmmaker in America. Also, we got to remember this is just a year after The Sopranos had debuted on HBO. So it was definitely in the vibe that gangsters were in, especially gangsters who were not the mafiosi of the Corleone law.
Yeah, a reinvention, a sort of. I mean, I guess you could look at this in the same way as you might look at sort of 70s westerns. You know, something that's happening after the mainstream of the genre has passed, and it's kind of reconstructing and deconstructing the sort of mythos of the genre.
I think that's exactly what Sexy Beast is doing, and probably in my eyes, and this is why I agreed to come on this podcast, is the best of all of these bunch of films that look at the gangster genre. This really, for me, it pays homage to all of the gangster films because it has all of the tropes of all of them, but it's so British in its nature, and the casting is absolutely brilliant by Lucy Bolting, that it kind of elevates itself to almost a unique position as a very adult comedy. I always think this is a comedy film that features some of the classic old men. It's the Lady Killers, but the kind of adult version of the Lady Killers. It's like a guy who wants to get a group of criminals to come and do a job, and instead of them like being bumbling criminals in the job, they're bumbling criminals talking about whether they should do the job or not, which is the beautiful aspect of this film. I mean, for those who, I'm going to just say, for those who haven't seen it, Sexy Beast is literally about a criminal called Gale, played by Ray Winston, who we meet by his swimming pool. He's retired. He's living a lovely life with his wife, his best friend, his wife, Jackie. They are living it up in Spain. And then all of a sudden, they get a phone call from Don Logan. And it's so clear at a dinner table that this is a bad man who's coming to pay a visit. And he knows that he's going to be asked to do a job, Gale. And Gale does not want to do the job. His wife does not want him to do a job. Deirdre, dirty Deirdre, as we find out. And the film is about whether he's going to be persuaded to do the job or not for much of the film.
Yeah, and as you say, it absolutely conforms to a lot of those genre tropes, the one last job, the getting the gang together, the heist film, the dangerous sort of psychopath who is close to you and you can't get away from, but all of those things you've seen in 1,000 other films. I mean, I think it's a danger of doing these podcasts after you've written the book that there are going to come out ideas in these conversations that you go, I never thought of that. Because it never occurred to me to think of the Ealing comedy aspect. But you're absolutely right. It is the Lady Killers and the Lavender Hill Mob.
Yeah, and I think it's very rooted in a Britishness, and that's what I really like about the characters. And it's a character study more than it is a gangster film. This is a study, and the character who it studies is surprisingly the supporting character, which is Don Logan, played by Ben Kingsley. Now, we've got to remember, in the year 2000, Ben Kingsley was still Gandhi in everybody's eyes. Even though that film was made in 1981, 82, it had been a role that Ben Kingsley could not escape from. It followed him around everywhere until he walked on and did this half an hour or so cameo in this beautiful movie. And that his aggressiveness, it was like shocking to see Gandhi swearing as much as he does, as violent as he is. But what I think is the key to this film for me, and what really captures the whole movie, is this is a film about how men cannot connect emotionally to their life. And they would rather have the tropes of masculinity than admit their own emotional feelings, try and act on their feelings, especially when it comes to the relationships to men and women. And what is wonderful about this film is it shows a character, Gale, who has really acknowledged his own position, has the woman who he calls, like, he loves her with all of his heart, he says in this film. And you can see the happiness that comes from that enables him to escape his gangster part. And you can see the unhappiness that lives within Don, because he is completely unable to have a relationship with anyone, it seems, but particularly with women. And he's only confronted, he's a macho, masculine man, but he turns into a timid child when he's confronted with the fact that he can't admit to a woman his true feelings. And that is an incredible aspect of this film.
Or even to Gal, because there is a very strong undercurrent of love with between Don and Gal, not which I have to say is one way. I think Don, he says at one point, you're a lovely fella, you're lovable Gal, and you're sort of thinking, and he says, I love you, Gal, and it's so strangely naked and vulnerable at that point that you almost feel sorry for him until the next stream of invective turns up. Just to go back to the Gandhi point, the other role that was very much of a piece with Gandhi was his role in Schindler's List as Itzhak Stern, which, once more is the role of the sort of apparently timid but incredibly resilient and strong moral center of a film. So in a sense, I wouldn't say necessarily it's typecasting, but it's certainly not in any way a step away from that Gandhi persona that you mentioned. And yeah, it was shocking to see Ben Kingsley in this role. It feels, if you were cynical, you could say it's almost like stunt casting, but I feel they also set up almost a kind of role that sort of older, middle-aged English thespians have to have their sweary gangster role now. Ralph Fiennes in Bruges, Hugh Jackman in The Gentleman, another Guy Ritchie film. Colin Farrell also turns up in Gentleman and does a sort of sweary crime adjacent role, let's say. So it feels almost like that he's set a precedent for now you can do this and be a Shakespearean actor as well.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And I think this is the beauty. I mean, we can call it stunt casting, but it's almost like these actors, because of the age they are carrying their previous roles into this movie. Like, Ray Winston gets away with being so soft as Gel because we believe he was formerly a gangster. He might have blonde hair. He might talk about love and emotional feelings, but we 100% believe, because we'd seen those, even from those Alan Clark films in the 70s, Scum, and we've seen him, like his career, Neil by Mouth, etc. We've seen those roles that he's played, that we believe he's a bad man who's turned good. And that is a beautiful moment of this. And with Ben Kingsley, we believe he can be vulnerable because we've seen him be vulnerable in other films. And so it's incredible casting, because these roles have nothing to do with their other movies, yet they carry this through. Even Ian McShane, who we'll talk about more later, he's so Machiavellian. You almost believe, of course, he's pulling all the strings, even if we don't see him do that. And so all of these aspects of the casting are so magical. I mean, the script is so good. That's probably why Jonathan Glazer, on top of all of his work in commercials and music videos before he made this film, got him these roles. But I think the casting of this is so amazing. The film would not be the same with a different cast.
No, absolutely. And I think it goes back to what you were saying about the gangster film as well, and specifically the British tradition of the gangster film, because, of course, you've got James Fox, who was in Camel and Rogue's Performance. You've got Ian McShane, you just mentioned, was in Villain with Richard Burton, and he was also in a film called, I think it's called Sewers of Gold, which actually has a very similar heist idea of tunneling under, using a sewer to basically tunnel under and find for the heist that takes place in this film. And he's also Lovejoy, which is a sort of Murder, She Wrote. I'm not sure how far outside the UK this show is known, but it's a kind of detective who's an antique dealer. And if you think that sounds twee, you're absolutely right. I mean, his sidekick is an alcoholic called Tinker. That's how twee that particular show is. So again, even there, I mean, Ian McShane, this is pre-Deadwood. This is pre-John Wick. So even he is coming out of being like a 1960s husband to Sylvia Crystal, the original star of the Emmanuelle films, and who's sort of, sunk into sort of TV middle-aged and comfort zone, Sunday afternoon after Songs of Praise. And here he turns up in a really significantly strange, subversive, as you say, Machiavellian role.
Yeah, and I think that is the beauty of this film completely. And so where I don't actually see this film as the plot, I just see it as characters. It was only when I rewatched it again for this podcast that I remembered that the film actually has a plot. Because in my memory, I just remember, Ray Winston on the swimming pool. That was also the poster, but I remembered like the ending. I remembered like the Don Logan character coming in, the kind of heist story that takes place in the UK, which, I wondered if that inspired the guys that did the heist in Hatton Cross many years later, who went through the lift shafts over the weekend to steal all of that jewelry. It seemed very similar. I was like, wow, it's almost like the plot of Sexy Beast was done in real life. With equally horrendous consequences and results for them. And so it's inspiring in a way, this film, and just watching actors who are clearly at the top of the game. This is why I feel like it's a much better film than, say, Gangster Number One. And also for me, Lock, Stock, because the performances and the characters feel so real. And we could talk about this film as, in a very highfalutin terms, as a study of masculinity gone wrong and masculinity gone right, or we could talk about this film as just like a fun comedic romp where you cannot guess the twists and turns that are going to come. But the filmmaking is incredible. And I can't wait till we talk a bit more about that a little later in this podcast, because so many of the things that Glazer does subsequently in his other films are all here in this movie, yet they don't feel so beyond the scope as they do in something like Under the Skin, where we almost see these weird perfume ads all of a sudden come in after horrific ads, or we see the segue that happened during the, where he goes back into the Holocaust Museum, and the name of that film is escaping me right now.
Zone of Interest.
Zone of Interest, where we see that. But in this film, we have this with an almost weirdly like, it almost looks like a guy dressed up in a furry animal costume who's representing the devil, who appears in girls' dreams. And also in the end, out maybe in his dream or outside of his dream, is very unclear. But these kind of segues of internalization. And that's what I think makes Jonathan Glazer's films very special. They're very internal. And usually cinema is a very external form, and it's books that are the internal form.
That's really true. I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, one thing I would say that, I mean, I totally agree. I don't think I've had a conversation about Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, even though at the time it felt like a big film. I don't think I've had a conversation about it since, I haven't rewatched it, whereas I've rewatched this film a number of times prior to even being interested in writing the book. One thing I would say that differentiates this film from Glazer's subsequent movies is that it's really a property that sort of came to him, in that this was a script by Louis Mellis and David Shinto, and I've read the script, and the script is incredibly detailed. Every line is exactly the same, but even the description of the places and it will refer to painters. It will say, this is a David Hockney swimming pool, and this has to be, this is done in this way. And the script is like reading Withnail and I, the script for Withnail and I. It's entertaining in and of itself. So Jeremy Thomas, who was the sort of legendary producer of Bertolucci and others, basically came on board because of the script. Originally, they were going to make Gangster Number One, which is also a Shinto and Mellis screenplay. In fact, there was supposed to be 3 films: Gangster Number One, Gangster Number Two, and Gangster Number Three, and this was Gangster Number Two. But because Gangster Number One, essentially they walked away from the project and took their names off it. I think the screenwriting credit is adapted by so-and-so, but it doesn't say what it's adapted from. there was a casting disagreement with the producers. They couldn't get who they wanted, which goes to your point that the casting of this film is so perfect that they were unhappy about the casting, so they ended up going and writing the second film and having the second film made with more control. So I feel that there is an element in which Jonathan Glazer is much more at the service of a script here than he has been in the past. But at the same time, you can see, you made reference to it earlier, the video and advertising background of Glazer. You can see him constantly looking for ways to make this visually interesting, you know, and at the very beginning, you know, with Ray Winston sort of sizzling, you know, I've never seen anything so hot in the Costa del Crime. This, you know, the sun baking, the use of the stranglers, peaches, it's just a perfect opening for the film.
I totally agree with that. And something I would say is, you know, the framing, every frame is so well thought about, and the colors are so different in this film, the color palette, than what he's subsequently used in films since. And so what we're seeing is very saturated, bright blues. There's even a discussion on the blues they could be in the swimming pool. The color palette and the color of Ray Winston's skin being like that red. It's like so much effort has been made on how this film looks. And some of the shots I don't think Glazer would do now, like with the hills, when Deirdre arrives in the car scene, really, you know, in many ways, it reminded me of Thelma and Louise, her arrival. And so the aesthetics are clearly coming from his music background, but something he really immediately is aware of because of adverts and commercials and music videos is that visually he needs to tell the story. And for me, something that is really fantastic about this film is at the very beginning, Ray Winston is almost hit by a falling boulder that comes crashing down and lands in the swimming pool. And that boulder becomes Don Logan. And it's so interesting how that he's a master of symbolism, Jonathan Glazer. I like this film much more than I like the other two films, but I can tell you with the other two films, I still see his symbolism is what carries him through. And he doesn't shoot a scene without thinking about how it impacts on the other scenes and the domino effect it has. And that's really amazing. He's also great at withdrawing information and letting the audience. So there's a moment, a little spoiler alert for anyone.
Well, let's say we're going to spoil it from now on. I think it's a 90-minute film. Go away and watch it if you haven't seen it already.
Exactly. So there is a beautiful moment where Gail lands in London, and we have no idea what's happened to Don. And he uses flashback with clearly referencing flashback, but they're not servicing plot. What they're servicing is telling us what we're trying to guess, because we're like, hold up, he's arrived. Is this because he needs to go? We don't know if Don's been shot. We haven't even seen Don be shot at this moment. Or has Don persuaded him because of the big argument that happens by the swimming pool? So we're trying to guess, but we're thinking probably. And my wife, who watched it for the first time, was like, "Oh, he's gone because Don's dead. He's probably shot Don," which isn't the case, but is almost the case. It's then revealed in beautiful moments by the little boy who is so friendly, who we don't know who he is. He just comes to help. He's got no other role in this film. Who comes in, and the swimming pool is being made, and we see it lovely going over the two hearts, the symbolism of the two hearts. Like, this is a place of love where hearts have connected. Could not be more apparent. And as soon as we see the water go over those hearts, we're like, Don is buried under there. And then thinking, the rest of the film is going to be about us discovering where Don is. But then he tells us that in 5 minutes. because it's not about that. It's about the character.
Absolutely. And it's about also the delivery of those flashbacks happens at moments where he's sort of, don't think about that, don't think about that. And of course, that's exactly what he's thinking. He's being interrogated essentially. And, it's the last thing he wants in his head. And that's exactly what's in his head. So it's also what you were saying earlier about the internalization, the novelistic sort of use of narrative rather than, it's like Dostoevsky or Edgar Allan Poe. What you're trying not to think about is what you're thinking about. Your guilt is you're carrying everywhere. Also, that little kid is so much like the surrogate son of Deirdre and
Of course.
Gal. It's their little family. There's a beautiful little bit, and I think the film is full of these beautiful moments where he just kicks Gal's ass and then like looks the other way as if he's totally innocent, and so Gal turns around and clips his ear, and this is just like the play fighting, and it's just so. It's like it's one of those moments where you think, oh wow, why don't we see more of that in films? In the sense of it's such it's extraneous to the plot. It's not. It's a little thing that people do though, and it just tells you everything you need to know about the character and their relationship. They can be playfully violent with one another because there's such a level of familiarity.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. I mean, and we really see that at the dinner scene when
I'll have the
Jackie comes in.
calamari. I'll have the calamari.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like calamari. I like this. And it's just like, yeah, again, you've seen a million scenes where people are in restaurants and they do this thing in Hollywood of constantly cutting their food and never eating it. They're always tapping their forks on the plate and all this sort of stuff. And once you notice it, it becomes so apparent nobody's eating because they're going to do 12 takes of this and the food has been under lights and no one wants to get sick. And then you see this and him just ordering, I think, what are you going to have? I think I'll have the calamari. It's just so natural. You just believe that Gal, has gone to this restaurant a number of times and he knows exactly what he wants.
Yeah, and even the entrance of his friends as Jackie's walking in, we just think, and he presumes they've had an argument. And so he's watching it and he's thinking, yeah, this is my friends. They're walking in. They've had an argument. We're going to settle them down. She orders a brandy. He carries on his thing of, oh, yeah, brandy. Brandy's a good idea. Thinking it's about his friends and their argument. And he's even told them to like cheer up and not ruin his night with his wife. And then almost like the dessert arriving before the main course. They then reveal that it's actually all about Gel and they're worried for his safety and he should not be worried about them.
Yeah, and that is such an amazing setup of the character of Don. It's just the look on their faces, the look on Ray Winston's face of like this tough guy who, you're assuming has this sort of dark side to him, but he just looks absolutely crushed. It's like the worst news could ever happen has just happened to him.
Yeah, and it transpires it is the worst news. And
Yeah.
but what's then, the thing that is very skillful and very hard is they built up the Don character so much at that stage, and they built him up as so evil that I was thinking when I first watched it, there's no way this guy can deliver on that level of fear that I believe Ray Winston is scared of this guy. I was like, come on. And Ben Kingsley's arriving, and you're like, Ben Kingsley's scared of Ray Winston. I'll pull the other one.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you see this character of Don who's got so much pent up anger, so much frustration. You believe from the first second, okay, this is the scariest guy in the room because he has no control. He's unhinged.
Yeah, absolutely. He's got absolutely zero, like he's an unleashed id. There's no social barrier to whatever he's going to do. And he doesn't even make sense. I mean, when he starts talking, he's hilarious. He makes himself laugh, and it's this monologue of sort of, I mean, this Melis Shinto script they started working on the stage. These were like small, very small theatre productions that were basically giving themselves. They were two outwork actors, sort of giving themselves roles to do. So you can see how delicious this is for an actor to do. But Don is incredibly theatrical, but at the same time, there's such a feeling of truth to him. And I think Ben Kingsley was interviewed, and he said to Ray Winston at one point, "How am I doing? Because I don't really know that anybody like this." And he says, I can give you an address of someone who is exactly like what you're doing. You've got it. You don't need to worry about it, man.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that is something that, growing up in London, you see characters like this. I grew up in a very working class estate, and there were definitely people as unhinged as this. They're just frustrated with everything in the world. They've got no connections. They're unliked, even though they want to be liked, and they can't see that their own behavior is what's causing people not to like them. And so instead of trying to change their behavior, they just get angrier and angrier and angrier. And in the end, this is what's going to save Gel, because no one ultimately can like Don, because Don is a character who's only useful for being a hard man. And he's not useful in any other situation. And he's ultimately unlikable unless he's making you money by being a criminal, which means he's only likable in the job. And in the end, that is what's going to save Gel, but they set this up so brilliantly in such a short space of time. And one of the things that made me laugh the most rewatching it, and I'd forgotten this, was the little touches of when they go out for a drink and they're sitting in the bar and they're looking in opposite ways. Like Ray Winston is looking towards the bar, and Ben Kingsley's Don is looking towards everybody else, and he's commenting. And this is where, when he cannot look into the eyes of Gel, is where he's most truthful and honest. He would never be able to say this if he was looking into the eyes of Gel. It's almost as an aside, as he's looking around, he reveals, "Oh, I slept with Jackie," and Don realizes, and he says it because Don realizes, "I've got one over you. I've got a secret to reveal that's going to ruin your paradise if I say this, because it's going to break your best friend's heart." And that is just like so poignant, in that the most vicious thing he says almost as an aside looking, because we know he cannot speak about emotions directly. But then he also lets slip that he actually quite likes Jackie. And then that is the little nugget of information that Gel is able to use to push the button of Don and it's a tremendous scene where this big hard man Gel is like, I wish you could see me now, is like up against his kitchen counter. He can't even, he's almost cowering as far in the corner of that kitchen as possible. He cannot make himself smaller. And all of a sudden he comes out with, "I know the real reason you're here is not me, it's Jackie." And that sends Don straight to the airport. Like, he cannot cope. He would rather run to the airport, run to the plane, run away, than say, "You're right," or "That's how I'm feeling," or even talk about it, discuss it. Is immediately like, I need to shut myself down and run away. There's something that my wife always says about Brits and football. She's like, they like football so much because it's the only place that men can have real emotions and sing and share camaraderie and bond and hug each other without it seeming odd. And this is a place and this is a world where Don has found himself in, because he never has to deal with his own emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that whole section where Don is trying to persuade trying to persuade Gal to take take part in the heist, sorry, they kind of go to different locations as well. They're sort of like, here they are on the beach, here they are in a nightclub, here they are, at home, and it's sort of how he's trying to, grind Gal down. And as you say, I mean, he even punches Gal at one point, and there's no. Gal's not going to defend himself. He's not going to fight back. There's no sense of him saying, "Oh, that's out of order." He just pretends it didn't happen.
But it's his wife who actually almost comes. In the bed, she actually steps over, knowing there's a code that Don couldn't possibly hit the woman.
Yeah.
As the only way of stopping him from attacking him more, a girl more. It's so interesting that within this world, there's a code. Like, Don needs Gale to say yes, he's going to do the job, and he cannot leave before that. And even though he's trying to force him the whole time, and amazingly, Gale is resistant to it, there's that code of conduct. And that underpins all gangster films. It's like from The Godfather onwards, there's the code of living, and it's worse if you break the code than if you kill someone or you behave badly. The code is sacrosanct.
Yeah, I always wonder about that, because there's this, and this is one of Don's brilliant sort of lateral thinking sort of linguistic quirks, is I think he threatens Deirdre. He says, "Nice eyes, are they real?" And you just sort of think, what is that? And I suppose it's the use of humor as well, because humor is a form of violence that you can always kind of deny. You can say lots of things under the guise of humor, or you can say, "I'm just joking," but at the same time, you can very much say things that will have an impact and an effect. And also, you have this great, it's almost like something out of a Pinteresque or Alan Ayckbourn or something like that, of sort of where there's almost like a party of them all together in the living room, and then one by one they go to the kitchen until Don's left on his own, and they're all in the kitchen hiding from him, saying sort of like, "Oh, it's awful, isn't it? Oh, it's terrible. What are we going to do? What are we going to do about this one guy who won't go away?" And then he has his moment of sort of soliloquy, which is almost like Gollum talking to himself in the puddle, where Schmeagol and Gollum are revealed that Don is actually sort of two people.
Yeah, I mean, we first have a hint of that because of the way it's filmed when he's talking to himself in that mirror, of like, it was eerie watching it, because it almost feels like the movement that we see of the person looking in the mirror doesn't quite match the movement in the mirror. Right. And that is uneery, because that is what's given us this idea of split personality and duality. And it's almost the way he can turn on a sixpence, because it's only after he's attacked Gale that he says, "I love you," in the next moment in a separate scene. And it's like, okay, this is someone who has never, using today's parlance, he's never done the work on himself. Trying to understand himself, trying to get to peace with himself, trying to find a position of where he can then accept his own life and his own choices, live with them and move forward, and hopefully be a kinder person to other people around. And that's definitely what we know has happened to Gale, which is why he's so wonderful with that Spanish kid. He's so wonderful. Even the conversations he has with his wife and friends, they're always honest.
Mm.
No one is dishonest in that group. It's always straightforward. We know what they're thinking. He is faced with a huge conundrum when he's told by Don that Jackie has slept with him 3 years previously, because he's all of a sudden, how do I tell my best friend what has happened here? Because that's just going to ruin him. But he immediately tells his wife, and he finds out then that his wife has known and held it back from him. So there's a code between the women. There's a code between the men. This film is all about the codes. And it says that these are the codes that kind of destroy lives when we stick more to the code than we do to the truth. And I think that's a big message of the movie. And you know, the last half of the film, we haven't talked much about it, where the heist takes place in London. Again, all of this parts of the movie really, I don't think Uncut Gems happens unless the Safdie brothers watch Sexy Beast. You know, there's so much that's similar in both films, even down to the shot that opens the Safdie brothers, Uncut Gems, of going through this kind of portal to Africa. In Uncut Gems. And here we have lots of portals that come to the underworld or the fantasy world. And so for me, this kind of second half of the film, all of a sudden, it changes a little bit, the movie, because the Ian McShane character, Teddy, he is like trying to do a heist on someone who he's slept with, but we never see who's behind him in that shot but we know who it is. And it's almost like there's an underpinning of sex in this whole film. It's like Don is wary of Jackie because he has no power here. It feels like Teddy wants revenge because he's let himself be sodomized. And there is a moment where, very much at the end, where he goes to shoot, where he goes to actually kills the owner of the security vaults for no reason, because he's already stolen everything. But it's clear it's shame. And there's a lot of we never find out what that shame is, but we get this idea that there's a lot of shame that's driving the criminal world.
Which is interesting because that's what Gal has liberated himself from, because he shows absolutely no jealousy or shame. He's taunted by Don with Deirdre's past. And
well, that's why it's important that, you know,
liberated.
Deirdre is a porn star, if you're still with us and don't mind all the spoilers, from who everybody has seen on screen. And yet he's not bothered. Gail is not bothered by this. He's at peace with that. He's like, yes, that's the woman that she was, just like the guy you're describing that when I was handsome in physique and had all the ladies, that was the guy I was. But right now, as he says, I've got everything I want. It's not riches, but it's enough. And to be at peace with having enough and to enjoy the wholesome family life that he's now leading, it's kind of the history of movies in a way. It's always the story from It's a Wonderful Life onwards of how family is the most important, and chasing riches, Coen brothers do this all the time, chasing riches is what is going to ruin your life. And as soon as he's decided that he's not going to chase riches or live through adrenaline, he's actually the happiest he can be. And so almost in so many ways, this is so classic Sexy Beast. Yet it's like no film we'd seen up to that moment, even though it came out with all of these other British gangster films, even though the central crisis and of just when I thought I was out, they brought me back in again. You know, all of that is like so classic. Yet it's put together in a unique way that really is where we're talking about auteur, who is an auteur and what an auteur means. It's brought about in a unique way because of what Jonathan Glazer brings to the framing and what he's able to get through these performances.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that we spent so long talking about the characters, and it's so interesting. And then we come to the plot actually quite late on in our conversation. I mean, that's telling in and of itself. I mean, the heist, I think it's almost for me one of the weakest parts, or at least it's one of the parts that feels very familiar when he's telling the story of the heist in different voices, and you see, you know, how it's going to go down, and then that comes back towards the end. It almost feels like, okay, this is slightly Tarantino-esque, or there's a, you know, I feel like I'm in a recognizable crime thriller when we're going through those stages. But then you're right, when we get to certain aspects of it, such as Ian McShane and the Eyes Wide Shut party and orgy, and even the fact that this bank is really a sort of private, it's called Imperial, I keep thinking of Imperial Leather, the old soap, but it's got some imperial name to it. And then when you see inside the actual boxes, there are sort of pictures of the colonial past of Britain. And there's a real sense of, oh, wow, there's weird history going on here, and weird... and the job itself is done in such an impressionistic way, where you have like the gangsters, for instance, are just sort of like this multi-headed mob who you don't hear any actual dialogue. It's all you know, and it's like Snoopy listening to the adults talk. You know, they're just exclamation marks as far as he's concerned, with the one exception being the bosses. And it's like if Don is Jesus Christ, Ian McShane is like God. He's you know, Don is Beelzebub, and Ian McShane is Lucifer. He's called the Prince of Darkness. I mean, they actually call him Terry Bass, the Prince of Darkness, you know. And he's quiet and listens, whereas Don talks and doesn't listen. So he has this, you know, he has this other superpower. And so when he interrogates Ray Winston and sort of provokes the flashback that we finally see the fate of what's going on, or at least part of the flashback, it concludes with Ian McShane saying, okay, I understand. And it's like, I understand doesn't necessarily mean I'm okay with this, or this is good, or I'm satisfied. It just means I know, you know, which is terrifying.
Exactly. And he makes clear he knows the whole time through. But, you know, we actually find that the reason that he doesn't kill Gale is because Don is worthless to anyone. He hasn't got any feelings towards him. But I found talking about the impressionistic nature, because I think this is something that's really important about the second half, and it's unspoken and it's unseen. The reason that actually Gale is great for this job is because they have to go through a steam room to go to break into the vault. And he's been living in the steam room of the Costa del Crime. And he's get used to the heat and he's used to the sweat. So he's actually perfect for this job in many ways, because he's also having to go underwater, and there's the symbolism of the swimming pool the whole way through. So there is a beautiful unspoken mirror from the heist to what happens in the first half of the movie with where he's living. And that connection is unspoken, but visually it's very apparent as a symbolism. And what this then also leads to is when he has interactions with Teddy, as you say, it shows how things can be different if you approach things in a different way. Teddy is just as evil as Don, maybe more so. He is also aware of what's going on, but he's also able to let Gale go and live his life and be away, which is Don's unable to do, because Don has never been able to accept anyone saying no to him. And so this is very interesting. But the one thing that is always unspoken, I'm really keen to hear your thought. Do you think that Teddy sent Don almost with an idea that Don might not come back from Spain?
That's a good one. Yeah, that's an idea. Yeah, I mean, the thing that I found interesting was the fact that I don't think Gal is indispensable to the job. So the insistence that we really need you, Gal, we really need you. Well, apparently not. I mean, because the job goes ahead without Don. You know, you would have thought Don would be even more indispensable than Gal is. I mean, Gal doesn't... I get what you're saying in terms of the impressionism of him being in a hot, sweaty place, but it's not like he has like a unique set of skills, to quote Liam Neeson. I mean, he's not. They're taking turns to do what he's doing. It's not like he's. I mean, he's a good criminal. He's a good. He's got experience. He can be relied upon, etc., etc. But the reason Don goes to Spain feels to me, and always has felt to me, much more about something else rather than simply recruiting Gal. And, I mean, he gets on the plane to fly back, and then in that sort of incredible scene where he decides he's not going to fly back, he's gonna return to the villa. And you get the answer to the question, yes, but what is this guy like outside of his criminal, when he's not talking to criminals? And it's like, he's just the same. He's exactly the same. He's the guy you do not want sitting on the next table at the restaurant, who you're going to say, oh, do you mind putting that cigarette out? Or do you mind not talking so loudly, please? Or swearing in front of my children. He's gonna decapitate you. So you don't want that at all. So, I mean, Teddy sending him on purpose just to eliminate him, or just to get out of his ear hole, just to have him not rabbit so much, is perfectly credible. Absolutely. But I do think Teddy also puts a bit of shit in Gal's salad when he says, I might pop in to pay my respects. Telling Gal in no uncertain terms he knows exactly where Don is buried, and also, that's going to ruin his calamari once more, isn't it, if he gets Teddy Bass turning up?
Of course, and in a way, it's him saying maybe you'll never retire from the job as well.
Yeah, the next time we need you.
Yeah, we know where you are, and we also now know what we have on you that will keep us coming back, just like the water returns to the swimming pool, just like he's returned to London. And so that's all nice. I do think it's interesting, the very, the fact that everything is then so romanticized in the end, that he's stolen, even though he doesn't get paid, he's stolen the ring. And for me, this then makes this, and the title, Sexy Beast, it then is so full of the title tells me this is, we don't call someone a sexy beast because they're a villain. We call them a sexy beast because probably they're also not just handsome and we want to sleep with them, but they're probably nice. I can't remember saying, oh, someone's a sexy beast because I think they're a cad. And so the fact that he then lives up to the title by stealing the ring that he keeps, and the job's worth it because he has a token of his love for Jackie, I don't know, for Deirdre, is so incredible and poignant that it's like a great romantic film, and no one ever would call Sexy Beast a romance.
Oh, well, that phone call he has from the Chinese restaurant when he's saying, you are the rain to my flower, you are the... And all I need to do is hear you say my name. I don't want you to say, you love me, or anything like that. Just say my name, and that will nourish me and get me through the next few hours. I just think that's such an amazing... There's so much emotional vulnerability there, and so much... well, you've already said it, but that, Gal is someone who is the opposite of Don, absolutely open and giving and ready to receive.
And that phone call is important because my reading of that call was his last call. I almost felt like he knows he's about to die, so he's calling the love of his life in a kind of final conversation. That was and I think that's maybe what, the whole way through, Glazer's playing on the fact we're expecting Girl to die throughout the whole movie, and lots of people die unexpectedly. And there I was like, oh my God, even in this final moment, he's being the strong, loving, caring man that he's become. And he's talking to her in such an affectionate way, even though he's aware this could be the final conversation. And that is a really beautiful moment.
Yeah, particularly because he's aware, the phone calls from the planes, during 9/11 to their loved ones. It's like that's who you phone. That's no other business is as important as that.
Yeah, and I think it's great because we got to talk about Deirdre and the courage that she constantly shows. And I think this is important because the film deals with these women suffering and having pasts that mean that they can be attacked, especially sexual pasts, whether it's being in a porn movie, whether it's Don having said he slept with her. We're not quite sure how consensual it is. It seems consensual by what Don says. But within that, they are women who now will do anything to protect their men and put their own selves on the line. And it's in fact the women that saves both of those men because one is like so accepting and the openness, and the other actually comes and they both come and kill Don Logan to a large extent. I know in the very ending, Harry finishes them off, but I think it's so impressive what the women do in this picture because they actually take on the masculine role of being the violent saviors. And that's very rarely discussed when people talk about Sexy Beast.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I get the feeling the implication is that they're both coming out of sex work, that Deirdre has been in pornography and Jackie, the only thing I have from that is that she slept with Don. And I think,
But no, she's never worked in an office either. They definitely
yeah,
bring that up.
yeah, right. And I think the element of her relationship with H might be that it's a bit transactional. I'll take you out of here, and okay, I'd rather have you as my sort of exclusive client than be on the streets as I lose my looks and as age comes in. Yeah, that might be me reading a bit too much into it. But let's talk about that final sort of Don's end, so to speak, because that has a certain here's spoiler for Murder on the Orient Express, where sort of like who killed Don? Well, they kind of all did. Everybody is has a hand in it. It's like an Elizabethan murder.
Apart from Gale, somehow. He's the only one he's the only one, and he never strikes Don. It's like he can't break that code. It's very interesting. And so, it starts off with the young Spanish boy fearing for his friend Gale, threatening with a gun. That gun is taken off him, and it's Deirdre who sees what's about to happen. I'm presuming at that moment, oh no, Don's going to get the gun. He's going to kill the Spanish kid. That seems to me what's about to happen. And Deirdre comes to save the day by shooting and leaving Don incapacitated on the floor, not yet dead, which means we then see, sorry, Dee Dee. We then see Jackie come in. Yeah, and Jackie comes in and she is kicking him with stilettos. And finally, we see H get the revenge, and that's a beautiful moment for the film. Weirdly, one of those deaths where if you're in the cinema, everyone would be cheering at that moment.
Yeah, it's a coup de theatre. There's a brilliant line as well of that sort of I fucked Jackie. Well, now I fucked you, won't I? And it's such a that aggressive use of sex as a sort of that a man will throw at another man for jealousy and to get a rise. And then it's taken sort of in its full metaphorical sense, and his head gets squashed, and then we get to see what movies sort of pre-trigger warnings call injury detail. It's always.
No, I did not see that. That's hilarious.
You always have foul language and injury detail.
That's hilarious.
So,
but I think that's also a strength of the film is that the women are equally as strong as the men and emotionally stronger in many ways. It's implied that they've had to suffer more in their lives, and the men have got to act out And in the end, they are the ones that can step up and literally like break the code because they're not part of that code, even though they've had their own code of secrets that's been revealed. So this is like, in many ways, the very, very everything we talk about sounds like it's all full of cliches. But the magic of this movie is none of it feels like a cliche when you're watching it. It feels like you're seeing these moments for the first time because everything comes as a surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the dialogue is so well written and is so well performed. You know, I can remember, you know, what mentioned earlier about the color of the swimming pool, but that's all delivered in a sort of jokey, you know, are you having see-through then? You're having the normal see-through color, and it's just so funny, you know, that everybody get the way they're reacting to that dialogue. It's all brilliantly done, and I think that's also, I think, something that maybe Glazer should get some credit for, in that he certainly seems to get great performances out of his actors. But I mean, I think you're also very right in highlighting the casting of this. With this kind of cast, it would be difficult not to get great performances.
I mean, you still have to get the performance, don't you? I
This
would
is
say
true.
that. And the other thing I would like to mention is we've mentioned the orgy scene, but it is played for laughs because it's the most boring orgy we've ever seen. And that actually everyone at the orgy is watching a porno film on TV. They're not actually interacting with each other until the moment that we see Teddy ask the owner of the security boxes if he likes men or women, and then we see him being taken sodomized in the next scene. And that is the only like moment of sex in this whole orgy, and it happens in a separate room. It's hilarious. The whole film is played for laughs, which I think is incredible.
And it's done. That scene is also done in a very sort. I've not. They're doing a sort of. They're mixing up the speed. What's it called? Speed ramping, where it's sort of going slow to slow motion to fast and to still, and so it's sort of purposefully alienating you as well. That this that bit again looks more like something he would be doing for a music video than a film. So as a debut, Kaleem, would you have sort of expected Glazer to have the career that he then subsequently had?
Oh, that's an amazing question because obviously it was many years until his next film, and it was highly anticipated. And all I knew about the next film was before I walked in that it was an adaptation of Under the Skin, the book.
Oh no, no. The
What?
next film was
Oh,
2006, was Birth.
oh, Birth, you're right. Birth was incredible. Now, Birth is a film that I could definitely see the man that made the man that made
Sexy
God,
Beast.
I'm guessing it, Sexy Beast make because like Birth is a film that is also about repression, and it's about sexual desire, it's about who this boy is and what men and women interact with and what that means, and if this is a relationship that should be allowed. I could totally see that as a film. Now we're talking about in this way. If I'm following those themes, something about Under the Skin that I didn't, I could see why he wanted to do this book because Under the Skin is also a book about sexual repression, although it's the book is very different from the film. But the way Jonathan Glazer plays it is, and this is the reason this is a film I don't love, I must say, Under the Skin,
Mm.
but he flips the whole film to be at the end that about the rape in the forest. And that's why I really don't like the end of Under the Skin. I think the book is better than the movie by far. And for me, there is this feeling of sexual repression that underlines all of his films. And even to extent we see that in Zone of Interest. And so there is a through line for these films, but it's not the through line I would have expected when I was watching Sexy Beast the first time, because I was expecting this to be a very aggressive, funny filmmaker who then went on to make like big comedic blockbusters in America rather than, films that don't really exist anymore. So, but, the kind of midnight runs and all of those movies, rather than the cerebral art house films, which is what I found so interesting when I was watching this, because I was like, oh, and you saying this is a script that came to him, because he's taken that script that's come to him. And the Jonathan Glazer elements are probably the visual elements of, the devil who's in the fantasy head, the use of water constantly, the boulder being in the boulder at the beginning, and the use of water and the kind of impressionistic nature. And he's taken that on. Like Birth, the main scene for me happens in the bath. There's under the skin, there's all of this idea in this kind of black liquid that consumes everybody. And so I can definitely see there's a through line of all these films, but it was not what I would have expected at all. And maybe in a way, I would love to see Jonathan Glazer do a very huge commercial film again, because he's clearly brilliant at it.
Yeah, that would be an interesting sort of exercise. I don't think it's going to happen, but that would be interesting to see. I think since this was the last film, his first film, but also the last film, he had nothing to do with the inception of the project. Every other film he's done, he's been very closely involved in the writing and developing of from the very get-go. Okay, brilliant. Well, I don't think there's anything left to say. I think we've nailed it, Kaleem. What do you think?
I think we're fucking brilliant. Sorry, I
there
had to
you
put that
go.
in.
We've managed to avoid it for the whole of the.
I had to ruin your podcast at the
Yeah.
end, just like Don Logan.
Yeah,
I couldn't help it, man.
Oh.
Because we haven't actually talked about the language. That was why I said that.
Ah, right.
Because
Well,
that is
point.
the one thing, we haven't spoken about. So we really need to. There is a vernacular in this film that is very aggressive, but it's part of the vernacular that makes it feel true to these characters in the period. It feels like the effing and blinding. There's a reason that effing and blinding is a phrase, because people do talk like that, and it's definitely associated with South London, East London, crime scenes, the criminal underworld, and the use of these words as common. I remember when I was growing up in the late 70s, early 80s, going to football matches, people would be effing and blinding at the games. There was no calling someone the four-letter C word, just didn't really matter. It was just part of common day language. You would never say that today without it causing huge offense. But there, it was so common that it almost makes these characters more believable. And there is actually a moment when Don says to Gail, well, I haven't been swearing. Why did you use a swear word? It's like, oh, if we're not using swear words, that means we're content and happy with each other. As soon as a swear word comes in, that means even if we have the same tone, we're displaying that we're ill at ease. And so the language of this film is completely important. And that's where some of the dialogue both feels very funny and of its time, but is very important in us in terms of believability.
Yeah, I mean, a swear word can appear between syllables in this film, and it feels over the top, but at the same time, that's only because films can be very can tone this down actually, and actually create a very unrealistic view of, I mean, if EastEnders, popular British soap opera, was actually filmed as people in that area speak, it wouldn't be on at 7 o'clock in the evening. It would be on after the watershed, because it would be, there would be a fair few characters in that, and I'm not talking about even criminals. I'm talking about mums and dads and kids and whatnot who would be effing and jeffing all over the shop. Ditto Coronation Street.
And it's interesting you say that, because this film has soap opera aspects to it in the plot, which is probably why we don't talk about the plot so much because there's like it feels like telenovela, soap opera-esque, but then it's the language, it's the performance that make it feel cinematic.
Yeah.
And that's where the language, especially at that time, you would never get away with saying one F word, let alone a C word on TV. And it would possibly, up until maybe 5 or 10 years before, have been cut from any TV broadcast. That this made that the language makes the film cinema at that time.
Yeah, yeah. I remember watching Glenn Ross, the film version, and being sort of, it's almost exhilarating the use of language. There was almost a sense of sort of liberation that the C word was being used by Al Pacino. It's like Al Pacino's using the C word, and then thinking, well, wait a minute, didn't Scarface ever, I mean, Scarface is full of swearing, but I'm not sure he ever used the C word. It's almost like there's, even there are codes. Even there, you can't go all in. So it's that strange mixture between hyper reality and reality that is almost like a signature of the film. And yeah, I totally agree with you. If you just look, even if you look at the script from a plot point of view, it's nowhere near as interesting as it is from a character point of view and a dialogue point of view. That's the strength. Right.
Definitely.
Well, listen, Kaleem, that's absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about Sexy Beast, You Sexy Beast.
Thank you for having me, John. I loved every second of it.
And all that remains is to remind everybody to buy my amazing book, Darkness Visible, The Cinema of Jonathan Glazer, which Kaleem has probably not yet read. I'm not entirely sure what the status is.
I have not yet read it yet. I have not yet read it.
But he has a good excuse. So
yeah, exactly. So we'll leave that excuse for later. But I will read it, of course. But once you invited me on the show, I actually decided not to read it because I didn't want your thoughts to impinge mine.
Which they would have done. They would have overtaken yours.
Of course, you would have been the Don trying to tell me that you were right the whole time while I was casually being girl going, no. I'm not doing it. I'm not buying it.
Turn now into yes. yes.
Wonderful. Thank you again for having me. And your show is always amazing. And it's one of the really enjoyable podcasts to listen to.
Thank you so much, Kaleem.